David Attenborough turns 100. Look at the house he plans to die in. David Attenborough is a legend who has spent his entire life showing us the beauty of our planet. Throughout a career spanning 8 extraordinary decades, he became one of the most recognized voices on Earth and lived in some impressive homes along the way. But now, as Sir David celebrates his 100th birthday, the house where he plans to spend his final days is a far cry from the grand estates you might expect. It's a striking contrast to the global fame he carries. So what kind of home does David Attenborough actually plan to die in? And why did he choose this quiet corner of London over everywhere else in the world? Let's take a look at the place he now calls his sanctuary. The gift of time: how a Jewish refugee's amber changed David's life forever. Before he was the voice of the planet, David was just a curious kid growing up on a college campus in Leicester. While other children were kicking footballs, David was scouring the ground for fossils and stones, treating every pebble like a hidden treasure. He was the middle child of 3 brothers, and talent clearly ran in the family. His older brother Richard would go on to become a Hollywood powerhouse, while younger brother John climbed to the top of the car industry. But even with all that ambition in the house, the Attenborough family was built on kindness. During World War II, his parents took in 2 Jewish refugee girls fleeing Germany. One of those sisters, Mary Ann, gave young David a gift that would change his life forever: a piece of amber with prehistoric creatures trapped inside. Decades later, that very amber became the centerpiece of one of his world-famous documentaries. David wasn't just a collector, either. At just 11 years old, he figured out that the local university needed newts for research. He told them he could supply as many as they wanted for 3 pence each, conveniently leaving out the fact that he was catching them from a pond right next door. The eye of a scientist, the hustle of an entrepreneur. The real turning point came in 1936, when he and Richard attended a lecture by the conservationist Grey Owl, who warned that humans were destroying the Earth's delicate balance. For a generation that had never heard the phrase ecological disaster, it was a thunderbolt. David never forgot it. It became the creed he would carry for the next 90 years. The Accidental Star: how Jack Lester's illness launched a television legend. After his time in the Royal Navy, David didn't head straight into the wild. He started quietly, editing science textbooks. Boredom hit fast. In 1950, he applied for a radio job at the BBC and was turned down. But his CV landed on the desk of Mary Adams, a senior figure in the BBC's brand new television department. She put him through a 3-month training course, and by 1952, he was a full-time BBC employee. The irony? Adams nearly kept him off screen permanently because she thought his teeth were too large for the camera. So he started behind the scenes, producing quiz shows and folk music series. His real break came through a show called Animal Patterns, filmed at London Zoo, where he met reptile expert Jack Lester. The two hatched a plan: they'd go on a live expedition to collect animals. They called it Zoo Quest. Just as cameras were ready to roll, Jack fell ill, and David stepped in as presenter at the last minute. The man with the supposedly oversized teeth was suddenly a star, and audiences adored his easy, natural style. Rather than move to Bristol when the BBC expanded its nature unit, David created his own department, the Travel and Exploration Unit, giving him the freedom to keep filming while staying close to his family in London. When BBC Two was struggling in the mid-1960s, they handed it to David, and he transformed it overnight, introducing snooker to television specifically because the colored balls looked spectacular on the new color screens, and even helping invent the yellow tennis ball because the old white ones were impossible to see on TV. By 1969 he was running both BBC channels, attending board meetings and signing budgets. It was about as far from the jungle as you can get. When rumors swirled that he was in line to become Director General, he rang his brother Richard and said flatly that he had no interest. He wanted to get back to the mud and the animals. In 1973, he walked away from his corner office for good. A 47-year foundation: how Jane Oriole made the Attenborough era possible. Behind every chapter of David's story is a woman who made it possible. He married Jane Elizabeth Ebsworth Oriole in 1950, and for nearly 50 years she was his anchor. While David was off exploring every corner of the globe, Jane was in Richmond raising their 2 children, Robert and Susan, and keeping the home that gave him a reason to return. David has always been painfully honest about his biggest regret: he missed enormous stretches of his children's lives. 3 months at a time, gone. It became a gentle family joke. Whenever a memory came up, they'd smile and say, "You wouldn't remember that, Dad. You weren't there." In 1997, tragedy arrived while David was in New Zealand filming The Life of Birds. Jane suffered a brain hemorrhage and fell into a coma. He raced back across the world and reached the hospital just in time. In a final moment that has stayed with him ever since, Jane squeezed his hand one last time before she passed away, aged 70. David described himself as getting into a total mess without her. His daughter Susan left her job as head teacher to step in, eventually becoming his business partner and the person who makes sure his fridge stays stocked. But David refused to leave the house. He still lives there today, in the home they shared, surrounded by the garden they planted together. The serious science: why researchers finally trusted David with their secrets. In 1979, life on Earth changed television forever. David treated nature with the same gravity you'd give a serious history documentary, and the world's best researchers began trusting him with discoveries they had never shared with any camera. Life on Earth was followed by The Living Planet, then The Trials of Life, completing what fans still call the original trilogy. In the 1990s, he took us to Antarctica for Life in the Freezer, then used time-lapse photography to show that plants are dynamic, aggressive, and fiercely competitive, a bold enough idea that his producers actually worried audiences wouldn't buy it. They won a Peabody Award. By 2008, he looked back and realized he had accidentally built an encyclopedia of life on Earth, covering almost every major group of living things across land, sea, and sky. Controversy in the cold: why the BBC's polar bear scandal still haunts his legacy. Even a living legend accumulates a few scars. The most uncomfortable came in 2011, when the BBC had to admit that the scenes of a polar bear nursing her cubs in Frozen Planet were filmed not in the Arctic, but in a zoo in the Netherlands. Critics felt deceived, arguing that even well-intentioned staging damaged the trust he had built with audiences over decades. David also faced pointed criticism for his early comments linking population growth in Africa and Asia to environmental collapse, with many arguing he was deflecting attention away from the resource consumption of wealthy nations. Writer George Monbiot pushed back against the notion that his early documentaries, for all their beauty, had lulled audiences into a false sense of security while the planet quietly burned. Through all of it, David listened, adapted, and kept going, which is perhaps the most Attenborough thing he has ever done. The world's favorite backyard: why David calls Richmond his only sanctuary. After visiting every continent on Earth, you might expect Sir David Attenborough to spend his centenary year on a private island or a remote highland retreat. Instead, the man who has seen everything has made a quietly radical choice. His favorite place on the planet is his home in Richmond, London, a leafy, upscale neighborhood tucked alongside the River Thames in Kew Gardens, where herds of deer roam freely through Richmond Park, just minutes from boutiques and coffee shops. Average house prices in Richmond sit close to £1 million, but for David, this has never been about property values. It's about the roots he planted with Jane over 47 years of marriage. Hello? His living space features unique arched windows, a well-worn brown leather sofa he's kept for decades, and books, DVDs, and ornaments from his travels arranged around the room. Outside, his garden is a wildlife haven, complete with a bird feeder hanging from a tree and a rhino-shaped stone seat on the patio. A photograph from 1998 captures it in full glory: stone walls overflowing with fern foliage and a small pond at the center, bursting with water lilies. Fittingly, in 2026, that wild, sustainable style has become the predominant trend in garden design. David was simply ahead of everyone else by about 30 years. Hello? +3. He bought his house in Richmond in 1952 and still lives there today, at the age of 100. Since Jane passed, the house has become more than a building. It is a living memory. Her spirit, he says, is still right there in the hallways and under the trees. Flickr. A century for the Earth. How May 8, 2026 became a global day of gratitude. On May 8, 2026, the world stopped to celebrate David Attenborough's 100th birthday. He received a personal birthday letter from King Charles III, and the gala at the Royal Albert Hall was attended by Prince William alongside Dame Judi Dench, Leonardo DiCaprio, Olivia Colman, and even Paddington Bear. Musical performances came from Bastille's Dan Smith and the Icelandic band Sigur Rós, who played their beloved track Hoppapalla to a hall that gave him a standing ovation. The BBC broadcast a 90-minute tribute, David Attenborough's 100 Years on Planet Earth, which served as the ultimate thank you from an institution he helped build. Time +2. The celebrations didn't stop there. The Attenborough Nature Reserve, which he personally opened back in 1966, marked his birthday alongside its own 60th anniversary with 3 days of festivities. Scientists honored him by naming a species of parasitic wasp after him, while fans in animal costumes gathered in Trafalgar Square to sing wildlife ballads and happy birthday. A day after the Royal Albert Hall event, composers Brian Eno and Pete Townsend organized a separate global virtual concert, gathering international choirs from New York, the Amazon, Ghana, and Venice. Time +2. And just weeks before his birthday, his 5-part BBC series Secret Garden aired to glowing reviews, earning a 5-star write-up in The Guardian, which called it a gorgeous fantasy that captured the thrilling stories of the animal world found hiding in Britain's own backyards. Viewers on social media were equally moved, with one writing, "Just finished it. A beautiful and optimistic start to 2026. The timing felt deliberate. A man who spent decades traveling to the farthest edges of the earth closing his century with a love letter to the garden outside your window." Wikipedia. Hello. As Sir David himself said in an audio message released ahead of May 8, "I had rather thought that I would celebrate my 100th birthday quietly, but it seems that many of you have had other ideas. My modern Met. He gave us the map. He gave us the tools. He showed us that the most extraordinary world is sometimes the one right outside your back door." Now, in his quiet Richmond sanctuary, surrounded by his fossils, his memories, and the garden he and Jane built together, the greatest broadcaster who ever lived finally has the chance to sit still and watch the wonderful recovery he always believed was possible. Are you a fan of David Attenborough? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.